It's no secret that the Washington Wizards have been very disappointing to start the season. When the Wizards traded John Wall in exchange for Russell Westbrook, many people thought that they would be a playoff team. While it is still very early on, the chances of Washington making the playoffs are looking slimmer and slimmer with each bad loss. There are a number of reasons why the Wizards have come out of the gates as slow as they have. They aren't coached well, they've had injury and health issues, and they're terrible on the defensive end. Going into this season, the goal of the front office was to show Bradley Beal that they were committed to winning and that they were competent enough to put a good team around him. Up to this point, they've completely failed, and it's looking like they'd be better off trading Beal now before he demands a trade and hurts his trade value. Quick disclaimer, I will not be including teams like the Clippers, Lakers, and Bucks in this video because I don't think that they have enough assets to realistically trade for a young star like Beal. With that in mind, I'll be basing my top 5 destinations for Beal off of 3 main criteria: Beal's potential fit with the new team, the risk-reward factor for the franchise that trades for Beal, as well as the return that Washington would be able to get for him. That being said, let's get into the first team on this list. Coming in at the 5th most likely landing spot for Bradley Beal, I have the Memphis Grizzlies. Before the start of the 2019-20 season, many people expected the Grizzlies to finish towards the bottom of the Western Conference standings. However, they surprised everyone by holding on to the 8th seed for a large portion of the year before just missing out on the playoffs. The Grizzlies have continued their success this year by getting off to a 7-6 start, despite the fact that Jaren Jackson hasn't played a game yet. That being said, Memphis may believe that a Beal trade could take them from a borderline playoff team to one of the better teams in the West for years to come. A Wizards-Grizzlies trade would send Gorgui Dieng, Dillon Brooks, Brandon Clark, Desmond Bane, 3 unprotected firsts, and 1 pick swap to Washington, and in return the Grizzlies would receive Ish Smith, Bradley Beal, and Anthony Gill. Although the Wizards wouldn't necessarily be getting a young star in this trade, Brooks, Clark, and Bane are already good players with the potential to become impact players on a contending team. By accepting this offer, the Wizards would be putting together a nice collection of complementary young players to surround the rookie that they select in this year's draft. For Memphis, they'd be getting an established star that could take them to the next level. A starting lineup of Ja, Beal, Kyle Anderson, Jackson, and Valanciunas would be young and good on both ends of the floor. While it is harder for small market teams like Memphis to acquire star players, I feel like trading for Beal may be a bit of a rushed move. Both Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson are just 21 years of age, and they have a pretty deep team at the moment. Like I said, acquiring Beal would make the Grizzlies much better, but it would probably be better for Memphis to make this kind of move as Morant and Jackson are closer to their primes. The Grizzlies would definitely consider making a trade like this because it would raise their ceiling for the next 5 to 6 years if Beal were to stay in Memphis throughout his prime. However, I think that they'll end up taking the more patient route for the reasons that I discussed, which is why I ultimately have them 5th on this list. At number 4, I've got the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers have become one of the more underrated teams in the NBA over the past couple seasons. Indiana has drafted well, selecting players like Aaron Holiday and Miles Turner. They've traded for talented guys such as TJ Warren and Domantas Sabonis, and the Pacers have made smart moves in free agency, such as facilitating a sign-and trade for Malcolm Brogdon and signing nice role players to fill out the bench. Overall, the Indiana Pacers have shown that they have a smart front office capable of putting together a consistent playoff team. However, what this Pacers team lacks is a go-to scorer that can average 25 to 30 points per game. This is where Bradley Beal comes into play. By sending Beal to the Pacers, the Wizards would be receiving TJ Warren, Caris LeVert, Aaron Holiday, and 5 first-round picks, 3 being unprotected and 2 being pick swaps. Warren is a good vet that could help provide scoring in Beal's absence. LeVert is an exciting 26-year-old shooting guard with all-star potential, and Aaron Holiday has turned into one of the most underrated young point guards in the league. This trade would give Washington a nice young core with Holiday, LeVert, Avdia, Hachimura, and Thomas Bryant. On top of that, the Wizards would be bringing in some additional draft capital with the draft picks being sent over by Indiana. For the Pacers, they'd be acquiring one of the best scorers in the NBA, and they'd still be a very deep team. If this trade were to go down, Indiana would have a starting lineup of Brogdon, Beal, Justin Holiday, Sabonis, and Turner, and off the bench they'd still have guys such as McConnell, Lamb, McDermott, and Goga Bitadze. This would be a very well-rounded team, and Bradley Beal would make the Pacers a bigger threat in a competitive Eastern Conference. The best part of this deal is that Indiana has many key contributors under contract for multiple seasons. Malcolm Brogdon, Miles Turner, and Justin Holiday have all been signed until 2023, and Domantas Sabonis is locked up until 2024. That being said, Beal could view the Pacers as a team that could contend throughout his prime, ultimately causing him to stay in Indiana for the long term. The next team on this list is the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavs were one of the most fun teams to watch last season, as the combination of Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis led to Dallas having the most efficient offense in NBA history. Unfortunately, they have not replicated that same success this season, as they are below 500 at the making of this video. While there are many reasons for the slow start, one of them has been Kristaps Porzingis' inconsistencies. It's early, but if Dallas isn't confident that Porzingis can be a good enough co-star next to Doncic, they may look to make him more of a third option by trading for Beal. Since the Mavs don't have a ton of young assets, they'd have to execute a 4-team trade. Now bear with me, there are a lot of moving pieces in this trade, but I'm going to explain the rationale for all teams involved. First of all, the Atlanta Hawks get involved in this trade because they want to move John Collins instead of overpaying for him in free agency. They send Collins to Washington and Tony Snell to the Mavs, and in return they receive Ish Smith, Josh Richardson, Dorian Finney-Smith, as well as a future first and second from the Mavs. This will ultimately give Atlanta more cap flexibility going forward, and they'll be bringing in 2 good wing defenders to play next to Trae Young. As I mentioned, Washington would be getting a good young player in John Collins, but they'd also receive Tim Hardaway Jr.'s expiring contract, rookie Josh Green, and 4 future picks as they look to rebuild. In Houston's case, they'd be sending Daniel House to Dallas for a 2025 second-round pick, and they'd also be getting Anthony Gill from Washington. Houston just acquired Kevin Porter Jr. from the Cavs, so they may look to free up minutes for him by trading away House. Lastly, Dallas gets Bradley Beal, as well as some 3-and-D specialists in Tony Snell and the aforementioned Daniel House. This would give the Mavs a starting lineup of Doncic, Beal, House, Porzingis, and Kleber, and a second unit of Brunson, Burke, Snell, James Johnson, and Dwight Powell. This would be a great move for the Mavs, and I'm almost certain that Beal would want to re-sign with Dallas. The only issue with this deal is that Washington may not be getting the best return in exchange for a 30-point-per-game scorer. Tim Hardaway Jr. would likely be gone after this season, Josh Green has potential but is unproven, and the picks they'd be getting from Dallas likely wouldn't be that significant since this trade would make the Mavs a great team for the next 7 or 8 years at least. John Collins would be the best pickup for the Wizards in this move, but he may use the fact that he was traded for Beal as leverage to demand a max contract. Collins is certainly a talented player, but paying him over $30 million a season would be considered an overpay. Collins could prove to be a nice fit next to Denny, Hachimura, and whatever top prospect they draft in 2021, but there are some legitimate concerns for Washington in this trade, which is why I have Dallas as the 3rd most likely destination for Beal. At number 2, I put the Denver Nuggets. Last season, the Nuggets surprised everyone by beating the Clippers in the second round and making it to the Western Conference Finals. Despite this, there are many people who feel that Denver is still one piece away from being able to win the championship. To add Beal, Denver would have to trade Gary Harris, Michael Porter Jr., Bol, 2 unprotected firsts, and 2 first-round pick swaps. Because Murray and Jokic are still young, those future picks likely wouldn't end up becoming anything special, but the players Washington would be getting would provide a lot of excitement. Gary Harris is a good solid 3-and-D player that is only 26, Bol is a project, but he has all the potential in the world, and Michael Porter Jr. is already an impact player that has legit superstar potential. The only fear is that both Bol and Porter have had injury concerns in the past, so the Wizards would be taking somewhat of a gamble by acquiring them. In Denver's case, trading for Beal would give the Nuggets a 3rd star that could take some pressure off of Jamal Murray on the perimeter. Not only would the trade make the team better on paper, but the on-court fit between Murray, Beal, and Jokic would be perfect as well. Earlier in his career, Beal played off the ball quite a lot when he was teammates with John Wall, but these past few seasons, Beal has gotten more of an opportunity to show fans what he can do with the ball in his hands. The point being that Beal would work in Denver's offense because he can be successful with or without the ball. While this trade would initially strip Denver of a lot of their depth, the hope would be that they could add some solid defensive-minded rotation players for next season. Even though this trade could be great for Denver, a lot of Nuggets fans would argue that Michael Porter Jr. might actually be the answer for them. While he is not as good as Beal at the moment, MPJ is only 22, and I believe that he has the potential to be even better than Beal one day. Denver's 2 best players, Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, are only 23 and 25 years old, so there's not necessarily any rush for the Nuggets to give up a lot of assets for an established star when they may have a future superstar on their hands in Michael Porter Jr. Because of this reality, I decided to put one team ahead of Denver on this list. Finally, coming in at number 1, I have the Miami Heat. The Heat are fresh off of a finals appearance in 2020, and they'd have a real chance to get back there in 2021 by making an offer for Bradley Beal. In order to do so, Miami would have to send Andre Iguodala, Kelly Olynyk, Kendrick Nunn, and Tyler Hero to Washington, and in return they'd receive Bradley Beal and Raul Neto. Additionally, the Heat would send 3 unprotected first-rounders, as well as 2 first-round pick swaps to the Wizards. Hero is just 21 years old and has all-star potential. Kendrick Nunn is 25 and made the all-rookie first team last year, and the Heat's 2026 and 2027 picks could end up being very valuable for Washington if the Heat are bad at that point. For Miami, they would be bringing in much more offensive firepower, and they'd have a legit big 3 with Bradley Beal, Jimmy Butler, and Bam Adebayo. The Heat would also have a lot of depth to complement the star power with guys such as Goran Dragic, Duncan Robinson, Mo Harkless, Precious Achiuwa, and Avery Bradley still on the roster. Another great thing about Miami is that they are a free agent destination. If players view this team as championship caliber, the Heat would not struggle to find people that they could sign to vet minimums going forward. The East is a competitive conference, but it is much more up for grabs than the West is, meaning that Beal would have a much more realistic shot at making the finals throughout his prime than he would with a Western Conference team like the Denver Nuggets.